Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Turlock and his team, for allowing us to give this presentation here. It's great, and it's great to see so many people have showed up. We were never worried. So I'll just work my way through this and tell you who we are. Basically, we're the core design development team from a small medical device company, which has been around for the last, I think, 28 years. We've stepped away and we set up our own company, try and share some of our expertise over that we developed over that time with everybody else in the kind of the Irish and other ecosystems where there's a lot of startup companies. In fairness, when we started up, there was maybe 3 or 4 startup companies, and our focus had always been more or less on the US market. We developed devices across a period of time and serially developed new devices, brought them from beginning to end. So we were kind of like a perpetual startup company. And over that time, we learned how not to do a lot of things and how to do other things very successfully. And I suppose the other thing to outline is that we always had a small core team. So we outsourced a lot of stuff that we need to do, including all our manufacturing. We always were the holder of the technical files. So we have lots of experience across almost every part of the development cycle. I've been designing medical devices, mostly in the advanced portion, but also obviously with that number of, my name on that number of patents. And despite Turlock selling it a little bit more strongly, my name is on claim 16 of some of the patents, and so it's not quite as exciting as it seems. But it means that I've been in the medical device design area since nearly it became regulated. So the MDD came in 1993. I started in 1996. The US design controls came in around about the same time. Risk management came in a few years later in about 1990. And then usability came in maybe 10, 12, 13 years after that. The FDA were pushing it on us without telling us what it was. And then the standard came on. And I feel that actually my whole career is kind of the way that the design process works for people who start companies. They go, oh, I've got a great idea. There's some kind of regulation that I need to do with this. And then risk management, I wonder what that is. And then when they're near the end, they go, oh, usability. Yeah, I should worry about that as well. So I think that what we've learned over the years is try and push everything into the early phases of your design as much as possible. I won't introduce everybody else. They can do a fine job of that if you go up and hassle them. Okay, so this is what the process looks like. And I'm going to make some assumptions here. I'm going to make an assumption that most of you have some idea about medical device design and development. And I think the key thing that I'm going to highlight on this slide is that risk management overrides all of the design phases of the process. And that's something that it takes a while, and especially if you start up your own company, to fully appreciate. The very huge tendency is to design a prototype and spend ages working on the technology because you understand the technology and you're a little bit in love with the technology. And you need to kind of put that in the wider concept of you're going to, at some stage, be developing a medical device company. So you need to look at how you're going to get your concept and turn it into a medical device. So the process is governed by risk management. And the earlier you get involved with risk management, the better. So if you're in concept, if in parallel you want to put your hazard list together, that's the way to do it. So that you look at what am I designing? How do I get my technology to work? And what happens if it breaks or doesn't work or does something else? Okay. And then the other thing that when you're in concept development, it's very easy to get caught up in this is how my device needs to work. I'm looking at my risk management, and you don't look at how you're going to design your device to make sure that you can actually manufacture it. Because all of the other steps that you do after this are going to need to have actual parts that you manufacture. And as a small company, we always outsourced all of our manufacturing. So everything that we could outsource, we did. So there's a lot of people out there with expertise, specific expertise in technologies that you're designing with and around, but have expertise in other technologies that are not your core skill set. So you might have an electronic part, but you're not really sure about the mechanics of it, or vice versa, which is much more common. But there'll be people out there who know how to do it for you and can help you develop the the technical file that you need to build. So I would suggest that you do some of your process development in parallel with your concept development. Design freeze, and I'm going to get into this in much greater detail later on. It's very tempting, if you have a good idea for a device, to develop it, do a design freeze, and say, okay, now I have a concept that works. But I don't think that's really enough to give you design freeze. And this is a lesson that we learned the hard way, I would say, over the years, in that you get to the end of concept and you've left out lots of things that should be in your design freeze. I'll get to what those things should be in a few minutes. But the more of those you get into your design freeze, the better it is for you. Design verification means that you're going to test that your inputs that you designed your device to meet are met by your outputs. And then design validation is that your device does what everybody wants it to do, including yourself. And then you get to product release. We'll get into those in more detail as we go through the whole process. These things are outside the technology, competitor assessment, regulatory strategy, and IP development and patenting. Or we could give a lecture on each one of those completely separately. And we're going to talk, I'm going to mention the CER, I think is in here once. That could be a whole lecture by itself as well. So we're not going to get into the weeds on every single detail. Okay, so where we're starting today is we're assuming from the point of view of this that that your clinical need, that you have an idea, you know what your clinical need is, you have initial market validation, you've talked to some people and they go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. The IP landscape has been at least assessed where you think, well, maybe I have an invention here that hasn't been invented already, or that's something that we can get around the patents that are already in place. And that there's commercial feasibility for it, that you will be able to sell the device at the end, or else why are we, any of us, doing this? What we will try and look into is looking at how you structure design inputs and outputs, how you do your design freeze, doing it right. And this is really at the point where right first time is the most important. Having all the things in your design freeze that you need in your design freeze. Then using risk management as a design tool, how your QMS should be built as you go. It's, as a small company, we understand that resources are not infinite. If you work for a giant corporation, they're going to have every quality document in place all the time, and they've all been there for the last 30 years. As a startup, if you're trying to invent a medical device, you don't need every piece of your QMS to be there all the time, but you do need some of it to be there when you start, because otherwise, how do you know what you've actually built? How do you know what you've tested? Can you remember what that doctor whose name was that said, oh, that would be a great idea if you did this other thing, if you haven't got it written down? And eventually, this will build up into what will become your technical file. We're going to talk about design verification and validation, and then we're going to talk about a little bit about how to embed your regulatory strategy as early as possible so that you know where you're going. Okay, design inputs. How do you find out what they are? Okay, talk to people. Talk to people who are going to be using your device. Model it as much as possible, and then model it in the real world use as much as possible. The third thing then, and this is the most critical really, is identify the true clinical or user problem. The issue here is that oftentimes an idea will come to you because you've talked to someone about a problem they have clinically. They may be the only person who has this problem, or they, as a, let's say it's a surgeon, as a surgeon, have an issue that they think they know the solution to, but maybe they don't know the solution to it. Maybe there's a better solution, and you are the person who needs to decide that. Check what's on the market. Don't reinvent the wheel, and also don't invent a device that costs $5,000 when there's a $5 thing that does it nearly as well or as well. Look at alternative solutions. So don't get kind of tunnel vision when you're in the development of your design inputs and in your concept. It's very easy to go, oh, I've got a great idea, and just follow that path and not listen to what people are telling you. And then keep cost and manufacturability in mind. Again, if you can get involved with a manufacturer, or at least talk to them as early as possible in this process, it helps so much in you understanding the kind of restraints they have, the kind of costs that they have, and the kind of costs that will be in the development process and then also in the actual finished device design. Yes, design traceability. I really like this slide. Ronan did it. So, so your design inputs show you what you should design. Okay, so they will turn into a big long list of all the things that your device will be. Your design outputs are what you did design, the spec of the thing that you actually designed, and then the thing that you're going to find critical at some point, you're going to have to test that these two things match up, and then how you do that is how you develop your acceptance criteria. For design inputs, it's very easy to pick a design input that says, oh, the device, you know, does this, it needs to get from A to B, so it has to be a certain length, okay? Your design output is, well, the measurable length is this, okay? But sometimes it'll be easy to say, okay, well, how do we actually know that our acceptance criteria is right? Yes, it has to be X long. But if it has to go around some circuitous route, maybe it doesn't need to be X long, maybe it needs to be Y long to give the surgeon a place to actually hold it or to be able to move the dimension that you need to a different place. So you need to make sure that your acceptance criteria is correct. Design verification is a test, and it shows that all of your design inputs meet your design outputs. So it's a test where you map those two things against each other. If you fail that, it means that your design outputs are incorrect. It means that you're not building the thing that you thought you were going to build. Design validation is showing that you're building the thing that the end user actually wants. That's critical. So you don't want to get to design validation and find out that that's not the thing they wanted. Okay. If you fail that, that means your design inputs were wrong. So that is a cycle you don't want to get into. And I will make one proviso. I know we're saying right first time here, but at design verification, and Ed might get into this a little bit more, sometimes because of resources, you're not working for J&J or Boston Scientific if you're designing your own medical device. Because of resources, you can't test every potential thing. You try to think of everything, but there will come a time where design verification will fail for something. And it's okay to go back in that case and just retest that thing to make sure you can get your design inputs to meet your design outputs. If you had infinite resources and you could run a production line for a year, you know, just to try it out and test everything at the end of that year, if everything's up and running, then fine. Your design verification should always pass. But I know in the real world, that's not always the case. And then the final thing that you get out of this is a product specification. So you know that it does what somebody wants, you know your inputs and outputs match each other, and then you can say, here is normally a document that says, here are all the ways that you will make our device. This is what a design traceability matrix looks like. And this is a very handy tool for making sure that you have a list of all your design inputs, the second column here, that you have a design output for all of these. And what I will say about the design inputs, and again, this is an area where it's very easy to kind of not fully define your design inputs, where they should all be measurable. As again, you know, I know in Galway, everyone loves building catheters. So the measurable inputs should be that it gets from, let's say, a radial artery to your heart. That should be a length. The temptation is to say with a design input is something like, oh, it's easy to get from the radial artery to the heart. That's not a design input because it's not measurable. You can ask a doctor, was that easy? They'll say, oh yeah, maybe it was. But what actually the design input is there is the stiffness of the material, the amount of friction that you're building up as you're pushing along, maybe how you configure it. So all of those become different design inputs, all of which are measurable. And you'll find if you talk to anyone in the FDA, they'll say to you, is this design input measurable? Have you studied a test that measures it? And is the answer within the range that you said? So we're giving you some examples here of what design inputs should look like, and then what the design outputs will actually look like, and then how you do the verification. And there's a step missing here because it's not really always required, but you do need to use a validated test method as well. So oftentimes you'll say, okay, well, I've used a ruler. Okay, a ruler's fine, but it needs to go through a tortuous pathway. Have you tested it in a tortuous pathway? Yes, we have. Have you validated that that tortuous pathway is the sort of tortuous pathway that somebody's going to use it in? No, we haven't. So these are some of the pitfalls you don't want to fall into. The very nice thing about this is that all of your inputs are mapped. This becomes a very, very long list if you do it this way. And it means that you don't forget to do some tests, which we've never done, but if you were to miss some, this is where they'd show up. There'd be a big hole here going, hold on a minute, we'd never validated that it was, easy to use, let's say. Okay, design freeze. Again, the temptation when you're developing a medical device is to freeze the design of the concept that you like, okay? Have you thought of everything you need to do to stop you having to re-verify this again and again and again, because you've missed out on some of the items that you need to think of right here? So sufficient clinical input. Have you just asked one surgeon, or have you asked 20 surgeons? Have you gone around the world to see if things are done differently in Germany from the way they're done in the US? Formative usability. I'm going to just touch on usability a few times during this day. We're not going to get into the full how you do usability part of this, but have you done some? Have you actually put it in someone's hand, an end user's hand, and got them to use it? I'll skip the environmental legislation for a second. Biocompatibility, compliance. Have you picked materials that you know are going to be compliant and biocompatible? Have you thought about your shelf life? Do you know the materials can last for as long as you want? Have you thought about your sterilization method? Does your sterilization method affect the materials that you've chosen? Have you considered the supply chain? So you will end up with lots of different, maybe subcontractors, molders, tubing suppliers, all kinds of different people in your supply chain. And they'll range from China to the US to, it depends on where you're making. So they could be all across the world. Those kind of things add cost, complexity. And as we found out during COVID, they actually shut down all manufacturing in the world because it just couldn't happen. So those kind of things, you just need to consider them. If you can keep everything close together, it makes it much more likely that you can be able to make your device. What is your cost of goods? Can you actually make it for a price that's going to make this economical? And the general working principle that we went, it never really worked out this way, but like a 10-to-1 ratio is nice. Medical devices cost a load of money to develop. So getting a good margin on them when you actually develop them is going to make your company and the medical device more worthwhile. And then what is your selling point? Do you know what cost you're going to sell it at? And therefore, is there a market there? Can you get reimbursed for it? There's lots of other questions. And then the environmental legislation impact is one that you will not find out about until very late on in this process, because someone in California is going to say, does this device meet our environmental regulations? And that's the first time, as your distributor hands you this piece of paper, it's the first time you'll hear about it if I didn't tell you here, unless you've been doing this and finding this out in the hard way, as a lot of people have. So you got to think about other things in materials that you use. And there may be other issues with materials around end of life for some materials, and other issues around that you just need to be aware of when you're choosing materials that you're going to use. Okay, so design freeze. Have you considered everything? Your IUS, have you got everything in place? Do you have component drawings? Do you have material specs? Have you developed a regulatory strategy? Enough clinical impact? Materials? It's kind of the same list again. Sterilization. And again, you don't have the resources maybe in a small company to do all of these things as a test procedure, but maybe it's worth your while, if you don't know the answers, to test them at the design freeze phase, even just to give them a once over to make sure that you're not going to melt something by putting it through gamma, or that something's not stable under gamma. Those kind of issues that do come up. I promise not to do too many anecdotes, but I'll just have one. I was working for a company that were developing, this is like in 1996, so it's not relevant to anything now much, but they were developing a new catheter, and they'd come up with a lovely material to build the catheter out of. It was exactly the right stiffness, it felt right, had the right friction, all that sort of stuff. They got it onto a production line, and they were a big enough company where they had time and energy to have like an advanced engineering department and a production line that they could actually run for a few months before they put it into production. And everyone went home one night. The next day they come in, all the material had melted. Like, what on earth happened here? And nobody had put together the fact that the cleaners, and the people cleaning down the benches at the end of the day use isopropyl alcohol to clean the benches. And the isopropyl alcohol had melted all the shafts and this is something that it's very hard to know this is going to happen to you. But again, try and be as complete in your design freeze as possible. Okay, and formative usability, I can't say often enough how useful that is as a tool to make sure that you're building something that the surgeon actually wants, and also helps you iterate your design greatly. You learn so much putting things into the hands of the end users and getting to use the device in a semi-clinical or whatever sort of environment they're going to use your device in, because you'll iterate it at this before design freeze many times, as I'm sure you all know, living the dream of developing a medical device. Okay, I think I've been through all of these. We just put them in here so that everybody knows what all the standards are, if anyone wants to keep up to speed on all of those. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Ed, who's going to kind of bring you through the second half of the process. He's going to look at it from a slightly more regulatory point of view, but also he has good engineering insight from having to listen to us all day, every day. So Ed.
So I guess I'm going to really reinforce what Shane has said. And we're going to start with the risk management and QMS. So everybody knows what a quality management system is. Shouldn't be something you fear. It shouldn't be a burden. It's a proportionate thing. So when you are in your startup phase and you have numerous concepts, you need some very initial control. So you need to have your concept procedure in place. You need to be understanding the design, and then you need to be documenting what that design is. So that leads to a document control where you're actually writing down, what is this concept? Why is it different from this concept? And then you're going to assess them. And as Shane mentioned, and again, it's all about reinforcing these basic processes. Risk management needs to start at the beginning. It's not an add-on. It's not something you think about at the end. If you apply the risk management standard, if you identify those hazards, if you think about risk analysis, you will end up with a more robust concept. Okay. Then I'd say the next step is you're at that design freeze stage. Now your QMS is going to have to reflect that. So you're going to have to introduce the full design and development process. So that's your design verification, your design validation, design transfer. All of those things, you're going to have a process that you follow. Some key items related to your device: clinical evaluation, especially in Europe. You're going to need to have your CEP in place. You're going to need to understand clinically what is the market there this device is going to enter. All right. How are you going to design a device that meets that clinical need? Biological evaluation. Again, Shane touched on this. Your materials. You need to know that the materials you select are appropriate for the device you're developing. So think about patient contact. Is it implantable? All of these things need to be considered. You need to have your BEP in place. Again, Shane spoke about formative usability. I'm going to hammer that home. Formative usability is probably the best tool you can use at concept stage to get some feedback, to get some verification from your end user, ideally, that the concept you have, that the approach you're taking is correct, that this is the device they want. Okay, and then supplier management. Again, it's about materials. So you've outlined roughly the materials you want. Who's going to provide them? Are they ISO 134 certified? You need to be able to evaluate your suppliers and ensure that material is built to your specification. Sorry, the material is to your specification and you understand the process. They don't change the process without your say so. All right. Training. So now that you have all these procedures in place, you need to make sure everybody in your company is trained on these procedures. Right? Very simple. Doesn't matter how big or small the company is. You've introduced these processes you say you're going to follow. These processes meet the regulations, okay? They're written exactly to comply with EU MDR, to comply with 21 CFR 820, all the specific CFRs, and of course your ISO 13485 standard. Next, right, so you've frozen your design, you've done your design verification. Can you hear me if I walk away from the microphone? Good, okay. Oh, sorry. All right, I'll try and stay here. It's hard for me though. So when you hit about the design verification, you're moving towards design validation. You really need to think about the rest of your QMS and the back-end procedures related to your device. So, you know, as you're going through design verification, your label can be pretty rough and ready, but you're going to need a labeling SOP to make sure all of the content that you're required to have on your label is there. You're going to need to comply with UDI, so your device is traceable. You're going to need to have, these relate to the development process and your QMS. So your QMS should always be improving, always iterating. That's why you need a non-conformance and a CAPA. So that's your corrective action, your preventive action. You are essentially now a medical device manufacturer. You haven't launched your device, you haven't got market clearance, but you need to be thinking about management review. Again, a requirement under ISO 13485. These then are the back-end processes on your device. So you have to think about the complete life cycle of the device. It's not just clearance to market and we're done. It's how we manage that device on the market. So post-market surveillance, very important. You might have to do a post-market clinical follow-up trial under EU MDR to produce that safety data. These are all things that will be part of your post-market surveillance SOP and your plan, okay? The SOP is not the plan relates to the device you're developing. Back-end stuff, customer complaints, and out of customer complaints vigilance. If there's any adverse events, you're going to need to report those to the regulators. And then again, if it's a CE mark you're after, you're going to need to have a UDAMED procedure. You're going to need to register yourself as a manufacturer. You're going to need to register your device and the UDI information. Okay, so that's a QMS. You got to think of it as your friend. It will guide you through the process. It will prompt you and tell you what you need to do at the correct time. Okay, you won't get all the way down the road and be like, oh crap, I forgot about this key element. Risk management. So Shane has spoken a lovely design process where risk management encompassed everything. That is really something we want to drive home. So the ISO standard has requirements for a systematic risk management process. Manufacturer must apply to identify, evaluate, control, and monitor risks. Okay, I've audited, I love anecdotes, so sorry, but I've audited many companies over my career. I've audited devices as well. And I asked, can I see your risk management file? And they go, here's the DFMICA. The DFMICA is one tool. The standard expects that you use many tools to look at risk from different perspectives. So DFMICA, everybody knows what that is, or sorry, DFMEA, sorry, Rona. This is very much bottom up. You look at each component and you assess and analyze the risk. Fault tree analysis is also bottom up. Event tree analysis is you take an event and then you work out how this could happen. What's your probability map of assessing this risk and what mitigation can you put in place? And the ISO standard always wants you to design out the risk, okay? If you can't design out the risk, then you're left with mitigation. Now we're going to talk about some key milestones. So you got design verification, design validation, and your regulatory submission. So what is design verification? It's where you confirm your design outputs meet your design inputs, okay? Again, this is prescribed by the regulation. When I say the regulation, I'm referring in general to the EU MDR, to the FDA regulations under CFR, okay? And also applicable standards. So again, the regulation is a requirement. The standard is how you, a method you use to meet that regulation. So, you know, if we go back a few slides before, Shane had reference to a load of different standards related to materials, related to biocompatibility, related to everything. And that's how the manufacturer meets the regulations. And that is the easiest way to do it, believe me. Follow the standard, and your notified body or your regulator is going to be very happy with the data. They're going to understand it. They're going to be able to step through it and give you a tick box at the end. Okay, so design verification. This is a standalone exercise. A lot of people say, oh yeah, design verification and validation. That's not accurate. Your design verification should be complete, should be in place. You should have updated your design traceability metrics. You have your input, your output, and you're verified. Okay, verification is complete, and then you were ready to move on to design validation. Shane mentioned this as well, but I just want to reiterate. If at design verification, especially if you're a startup, it's very likely that your verification will throw up an issue or two. It's not the end of the world. It's much better to be finding them now as opposed going to design validation, having to pay for your end user, having to pay for your use environment. You know, that's a costly exercise, excuse me. So design verification more than likely will throw up something small. You don't have to redo your entire design verification. You can make a design change on the component or the input that failed. You can retest that, and you can include a justification for the other existing data in your original verification while that's still relevant. Okay, so I'll move on to the next one. Process validation. So when is the best time to do process validation? Ideally, you're building your design verification devices first. You're going to do your design verification testing, and if all that goes well, you can then do your process validation without changing anything. If in your design verification it throws up something, it's easier to change that process, and you don't have to redo. You have to redo your OQ, but you don't have to redo your process qualification. So process qualification. Not the process validation. Is that the right slide?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So you got your IQ, your PQ, your OQ, and your PQ. Your IQ is very straightforward. It's you know, get the services to the equipment. It turns on. It works. Very straightforward. OQ is a bit more involved. You need to be defining the limits of your process. Ideally, you want to set it up so you're manufacturing at the mean. It may require, based on how many parameter inputs you have, you may need to do some DOE before you have your OQ protocol ready to go. A good thing here is, again, as you build your technical documentation, which outputs from your QMS, the idea of what you're trying to do is generate a set of documentation that you can put in front of an auditor to get your device cleared to market, to demonstrate it's safe and effective. You want that auditor to have a nice experience, for it to be very straightforward, for them to be able to access the data they need to in a very easy and approachable way. So, you know, there is templates in there. If we talk about the EU MDR, which I'll go to in more detail shortly, it specifies exactly what needs to be in your technical documentation. If you build in that format into your QMS from the start, you will be producing the technical documentation right first time, real time, okay? So that's something you need to think about. A validation master plan is a very good way of ensuring all of that process validation is viewable at a quick glance. You know, they can decide, they can cherry pick which processes they're going to review in detail. Are we low on time? Okay, design validation. So design validation confirms the finished device meets defined user needs in its intended use environment. Okay. Again, we have design validation and summative usability here. These are separate items. Your summative usability is looking at how the user interacts with the user interface. Your design validation, as is stated here, is where you validate that the thing you outputted, the device you built, meets the design inputs. Okay, so I would strongly recommend that while you may be doing it with the same cohort of end users, you may be executing it at the same time on the same day, that you'd have two separate protocols. Again, I'm not sure how familiar you are with a technical documentation review, a conformity assessment by a notified body, but it is not one auditor that will review everything. For example, the clinical evaluation, the CEP and CER, that can be sent to a clinical specialist. So too can be your packaging information, that can be to another specialist, your sterilization, and so on and so on. So how you structure your technical documentation, how accessible you make it, all supports you getting that CE mark. So I kind of touched on a few of these. Regulatory submission. So as you're all aware, you need to make a pre-market submission. You need to apply to either the regulator, such as FDA, or you need to put a contract in place with a notified body and have a CE mark application under MDR. I'm just going to focus, obviously, it's a global world out there, there's regulators, but we can't get into everything, so we'll just focus on these. For the USA, so if your device is a Me Too device, if you're iterating something that's on the market or have an approach where it's the same intended use or indications for use, you can select a predicate, a device that's already cleared that closely resembles your device, and you can apply under a 510K. This is very straightforward now. FDA, there's a template you can follow. You can submit your e-copy, your E510K. Great, really straightforward. De novo then is where it's a new device, it's a novel device. So this is again a controlled process. And then if you have a class 3 device, it's called a PMA. The higher the classification of device, the higher the burden. And the higher the burden on the manufacturer. So for class 3, it's going to mean a clinical investigation. And that's the requirement under the regs to demonstrate the safety and effectiveness of your device. So again, if we go all the way back to design freeze and we're thinking about our intended use specification form, when we have our concept and we're like, oh, it can do this, it can do that, what about this? And it's all super exciting. You need to have that regulatory strategy in your mind. How much funding are we going to be able to get for this? What is the device we're going to try and release to market? So make those decisions at the start. Have that in your mind at design freeze. Have a way, a plan to get on the market. What then? So under a CE mark application, it's not just your technical documentation that the notified body is going to review. It's a stage 1, stage 2 process. Stage 1 is they're going to look at your QMS. So again, guys, don't be thinking about the QMS as, oh, I'll tack that on at the end. Sure, you know, it'll be grand. You need to have it in place. Your QMS outputs your technical documentation. It does it in real time, and it's going to be reviewed by your notified body. You cannot pass go if your QMS is not up to scratch, if the processes you've put in place do not meet the regulation. Okay? And then the MDR, the good news is, right, everybody's kind of, oh my God, the MDR, the burden. But the good news is it's all written down. It's all there. There's no magic. It's not hidden. It's all clearly identifiable what you need to do. And I understand experience makes that pathway much easier to navigate, but it is there. So your technical documentation is under Annex 2 and 3. MDR Annex 1 tells you all of that. The GSPRs tells you everything your device, all the testing you're going to have completed to get your CE mark. I should say both for the FDA and for your notified body, there is guidance documents. The NDCG are the guidance documents. For Europe, FDA is great. Like the guidance documents are written in plain English. There's no legalese, there's no confusing terms. It's very easy to follow. And just some personal feedback then on the FDA and the notified body, if you wish. But the FDA is much easier to deal with. So you can make your submission. Before you make your submission, if you're unsure of your pathway to market, you can hold a pre-submission meeting with FDA. You can find out who is the appropriate person to talk with. You can request a meeting. You can go into that meeting with a regulatory pathway you have in mind. And the FDA will tell you. They will say, no, Ed, I'm sorry, we don't think this is correct. Have you thought about X? Okay? So you can know ahead of time before you invest all this energy, manpower, money, etc., and time into it, whether you have a regulatory pathway that's appropriate for the device you want to develop. The FDA is scientists. If you produce the data, if the data meets the regs, it's not a difficult process. Notified body engagement has changed a lot over the years. So it used to be 15 years ago, you'd apply for a CE mark under MDD. An auditor would come on site. They'd be there for 3 days. They'd review your QMS. They'd review your technical documentation. They'd be in front of you. You could have many discussions and you would get to the end. You might have a minor non-conformance or two, but you would be guaranteed your CE mark in a much more back and forth manner. Now that process is very controlled. As I mentioned earlier, there is many different auditors involved, and those auditors mightn't talk to each other at all. And the default position, your notified body, which as we know are private companies, is if I can't find it, it's not there and it's a minor non-conformance. So again, if you can take that on board, how you format your technical documentation is really critical. I think, Shane, I'm going to hand back to Shane now to close it out. I hope that wasn't too aggressive. It's all there. You just need to follow it, okay? Thanks, guys.
Okay, so finally, a small bit of advertising for us. Why would you want us to come and help you? I think we have lots of experience and we've been down this road many times with many different types of medical devices. We're going to take some of the cost of hiring a bunch of people out of your company if you're starting a company. So we will come in, help you guys out for a period of time and point you in the right direction, help you with some of the engineering issues you might run into, help you with finding CDMOs that might be applicable for your requirements, trying to get you on the correct regulatory pathway early, making sure that you think of everything during design freeze. I can't say that enough times. Then you can take us, we'll be independent, but you can take us piecemeal. So if you need someone for some period of time to do a certain task, you can take us on for that. And if you need us to be your kind of technical backbone as you develop the process, you can take us on to do that. And I think we've talked to people across every section of the development path, people who are, just with an idea, people who are in comm funds, people who are in medical device startup companies who are at the next stage. And we see what the issues are, both from a resourcing point of view and a kind of technical point of view and a understanding all of the process point of view. So we can definitely help you there. I mean, we fully understand what it's like to be someone with a good idea and then having to try and build a medical device company out of that, which is a very different thing from building a very nice, app for something, let's say, or something else. It's a very different process, and trying to get as much of it right at the beginning as possible is, I think, where we can add value. We don't want Ed to be your quality manager in 5 years' time. We want you to have, be selling 100 million devices a year, and someone else can worry about it then. Okay. So we can do that in bits. So we can have technical advisors, we can be embedded in your program, so you can take somebody on to do a certain part of it for a period of time, or we can be a life partner. And again, as you get further along in the process, we can help you by being effectively your staff at a certain point in time as you're trying to build up your company. So just an overall of what we do. And if you want to contact us, we're all here. So that's a good start, and we can be contacted anytime. What I normally do now, but this is not my laptop, so I won't do it, is put up what a project plan looks like. Our project plan for a relatively straightforward device has like 260 line items on it. And you can see concept takes up, you know, a large section, and then everything else happens in parallel. So we try to get all of the design verification, packaging testing, sterilization, biocompatibility, all of that stuff to happen once you have your design freeze done, saving you the problem of having to do them one after another and extending your timeline ad infinitum as you find a mistake in one thing and you have to move on and then go back into design freeze and start again. So I think that's my final remark.